I am so grateful to be here with my church family on Mother's Day. My mother has gone on to be with the Lord, but I have to say there's something that I learned from my mother, and I think you'll all understand. I was kind of a stinker growing up. I didn't know how to shut my mouth, especially when my dad was preaching. And I remember my mother had to do one thing. She would stand up. She'd stand up and turn where she knew where I was. And when she stood up, I knew what was coming at the end of that service when we got home. Pastor's been talking about the power of God. Man, there ain't nothing like a mother standing up and giving you that look. So moms, you're right there with the Lord, and we're going to talk about a mother this morning that stood up and what it meant, what it did. If you will, read with me. I'm going to read through this chapter. And this is one of those messages, and pretty much because I'm a teacher, I like teaching. I just wish we could sit around and talk about this one, because there is so much in this passage that we could actually go for weeks on it, but there's so many questions and answers, and I'd just love to be able to sit around and talk with a group of people about this. So I'm going to try to talk through it this morning and do it quick enough so you can get to the restaurants and take your mother to dinner. I hope she didn't have to cook for you. So let's, if you will, read along with me from 1 Samuel 1. You'll quickly recognize the story, and we'll walk through it together. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim. I can't say all those names. I can barely speak Italian. So, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, and Ephrathite. Okay? Just so you know, Ephrathite is just north of Jerusalem by about 20 miles. He had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship, to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival, which would be Peninnah, used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord. She used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than these 10 sons? After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from me. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord. I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I've been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, Let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go, for she said to her husband, As soon as a child is weaned, I will bring him, so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his words. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. And she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and the child was young. Then she slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, O Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who is standing here in the presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord as long as he lives. He is lent to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. Hannah is an interesting character. In all my life growing up, I learned about the prayer of Hannah. But there's a lot more in this passage, and so let's kind of work from it from the beginning. First thing you have to understand when you read the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, but primarily I get a lot of questions from the Old Testament. As we read through it, we have to understand the culture, and that's difficult for us. It's really hard for us because whether you know it or not, and it's interesting, it's a fascinating thing if you talk to young people like I do all the time. We talk with these young people and they talk about you should. You should do this and you shouldn't do that and you should do this. And you ask them, okay, well, what's your worldview? What position, what foundation are you coming from? Well, I'm atheist. Well, that's interesting. So where does this should come from? And come to find out what our conversation eventually helped them to realize, they're borrowing from my Judeo-Christian value system. Jesus Christ put these values out there. God said this about us, and they're borrowing from us. And this is important for you to understand because back in that day, they're not coming from that. Although young people nowadays, a lot of them, especially where Melissa and I are missionaries in Italy that are atheists, they don't understand that you shouldn't kill someone or you should be kind. They don't understand the foundation of where it comes from, okay? And it's our job to help them find that foundation. But in their day, there was not this foundation. It was coming. It had been started in Deuteronomy, and it had been started in Genesis when God started with Abraham. But remember, Paul even talks about who is the prince and power of the air. Satan is. He still is. So there's a fight going on, and it was a lot stronger fight back then because you have to understand, and you can see it when you go to some of these older countries. For example, you can stand in San Gimignano, Italy, and you can look across the valley and see Cassola di Elsa, which is another walled city, and you can look from there and see Menzano, which is another walled city. And each one of these walled cities is the same in Israel. It's the way it was back then. Each one of these walled cities were their own kingdom. And they were run by a king who said, I'm going to do what's right in my mind. And I'm going to govern my town with the way it's right in my mind. And I've got control of these people, and I've got control of these land. And by the way, I want what they have. And so what would happen is that one morning, everybody in another town would wake up, and here's an army sitting in front of you saying, I want what you've got, and I'm here to take it. Does that make sense? The culture was every man does what's right in his own mind. So when you're reading the Old Testament, that was the rule of the day. They didn't have social media where everybody was saying, oh, you need to be nice, and they're still saying do what's right in your own mind, but they want to throw love in there. They don't know where that love came from, and being kind to others, they don't know where that came from, but it's ingrained in them because our founding fathers started from that position, right? Now, there's another foundation that you have to understand. A mother in those days, her value system was built on producing children. You think, oh, that's archaic, that's all terrible, putting the mother's value on that, but that's how they function. Because here's what happened. Think about it, if I am a father and I have a lot of sons and I'm a shepherd, how many sheep can I watch by myself? Not many. And the more sons that I have, or children that I have, even daughters were able to be helped with the shepherding, I could get more sheep. So the more children I have more of a workforce, a free workforce to work from. I experienced this back in the 70s to some extent. I worked on my uncle's farm. He paid me, okay? It wasn't slave labor, and I did it voluntarily because I loved working on the farm. But we could do more land because I was there to help the family. The more sons the family had, or daughters, in the case of a neighbor, he had 4 daughters, and they worked just as hard as the guys did. They could drive tractor better than I could. But anyway, the more people you had, it had an impact on your wealth, okay? And if you were a craftsman, you taught your child how to do this or that, and they did the same. In Italy, I've got a friend who is a violin maker. His daughter makes violins now, so they've doubled their production. He gets a lot of money for his violins, so he loves the Lord, but he's making more money now. One other impact, they didn't have a welfare system, right? Who is their welfare system? Their children. Who's going to take care of them when they get old? Their children. So they were influenced, a mother was influenced to have children so that they could flourish in their community. This was the pressure. Does that make sense? Is that starting to see where this comes from? And we sit back and we say, oh, we don't have that pressure today. We don't treat women that way. You know, they're more than just making babies and so on and so forth. And I'm going to say, wrong answer. I think we have more pressure than we've ever had in the history of man, quite honestly. You see, the culture that we live in has a huge impact on mothers. Mothers take the brunt of it, and I'm going to show you why. Let me refer just 1 minute to some of the impacts that we have in today's pressure. I started looking through different things, and it's scary, some of the statistics that came up. Fertility Market in 2020. This is the impact to have children. The fertility market in America in 2020 is $26.8 billion a year. It's expected by 2027 to reach $45 billion per year. The average family, just to get started, spends $7,000. Now, I don't know if any of you have gone through this process, but you know something that's very important that everybody else understands. Insurance doesn't cover that. That comes out of your pocket. So there is a huge impact on or pressure from our culture for having children. Another interesting fact, and I'm not going to spend any time on this because this is kind of a tangent, is social media. Social media hounds you from one side if you are a mother, and then they tell you that you're degrading yourself, degrading you for being a mother, but then tells you should be a mother. Depends on which side you listen to. And here's the problem with that. You don't know if the social media input that you're getting to influence your life, whether it's true or not. I don't know if you've seen the documentary, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, and I'm not telling you to go watch it. But there's a documentary called Social Dilemma. And in that in that documentary, Tristan Harris has something to say. He's a former design ethicist at Google and central character in the documentary Social Dilemma. He says that social media is no longer a tool for people to use. Instead, he explains that social media has its own goal and pursues them by using psychology against its users. It's seducing you. It's manipulating you. It wants things from you. That's called advertising. If anything's ever bad, just follow the dollars. Somebody's got some dollars behind it. Harris says in the film, we have moved away from having a tools-based technology environment to an addiction and manipulation-based technology environment. They're manipulating you. You have that more than ever. And here's one other aspect of that, and I'll quit from here and go back to my sermon. I was listening to looking for some statistics, and I came across a statistic that just blew my mind. Right now, we have an issue before us called gender neutrality or general whatever. When this started, a decision to change gender was a very, very small percentage of males in America that were looking for gender change. The latest statistics that some of the psychologists and social people are looking at now, it could be now as high as 1 in 50 young adolescent girls have already started the process of some type of gender modification. That's not the scary part. The scary part is many of these girls, if not most, are having psychological issues. And they said, the sociologists and psychologists that are studying this are saying that suicide is skyrocketing amongst these young ladies. It's coming from social media, cultural influence, that people at an age when they're most vulnerable, when their hormones are going crazy, trying to decide what's going on in their own bodies, they, under the guise of giving them the right They can walk into a doctor's office and have unbelievable, unchangeable things done to their body. And it's sad. There's no oversight over it. The doctor can do whatever he wants. Whatever he's asked, he's obligated to do. So, where are we at in our culture? Yes, they had troubles back then. They had pressures back then. Hannah had unbelievable pressure to do something, to be of value in her family. And we face those same things today. The interesting thing, I think, is Elkanah. Dude is lost. I mean, he is, anyway. He is a believer. He believes in the Lord, but he has created a toxic environment to live in. Because you see, he loved Hannah and he married Hannah. It's pretty well understood between commentators that Hannah was his first wife, probably, and she couldn't have kids. And since she couldn't have kids, he really loved her, but she couldn't have kids. So what did he do? He went out and got Peninnah. He said, I can't have this. And so now he's brought another woman into bigamy has come into the family, right? And what's terrible is as you read through that, you understand that when they went up to worship, he would show favoritism towards Hannah. So here you've got this wife that all she's good for in her mind, according to her husband, is producing babies. She has no value. She's not loved. And she's stuck in a house with a woman, and she's trying to get her value and her needs met, and she's stuck in this house with this woman who can't. So she feels unloved, so she picks on Hannah. You see the insanity that's going on in this story? It is insane, the different things that we do as a culture. We see something, I want what I want. I do what I know I can do. I can manipulate something to get what I want, but I've just caused 10 times the problems for myself that I had when I started with. And if you put that, I hope today that as I go through this, you put this in the context of what the pastor has been talking about the names of God. All these names are provisionary for us. God is all of these things for us. He has these things. And if you read that passage closely, you see at the very first, God closed Hannah's womb. God closed her womb. We're going to see in a minute why, okay? But God closed her womb. But yet, here she is getting beat up and pounded by her culture and the family that she lives in, trying to overcome this struggle. So what did Hannah do? And the question before us is, what does a mother do? What do you do as a mom to find value? And I think we find the answer with Hannah this morning. So look at 1 Samuel 1, verses 9 through 10. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. That's better translated, Hannah stood up. Okay? Because they were sitting around there together, and the pressure was building, and the pressure was building, and the pressure was building. Finally, Hannah said, I've had enough. And she stood up. And where did she go? She went into the temple. She had to walk right by Eli to get in the temple because he was sitting in his post. And here's the interesting thing. You read there that when she walked by, he thought she was drunk because she was praying. She stood up and she's walking in the temple and she's already praying on her way. And her mouth is moving. And Eli says, well, she must be drunk. What that shows you is the character of the day. He wasn't surprised that somebody was drunk walking into the temple. It didn't catch him off guard. He was mad at her for being drunk, walking into the temple. Obviously, it had happened before. Do you see the climate that we're talking about? Does it give you a picture of the climate that this lady is involved in? I hope so, because the pressure is unbelievable on this lady. Unbelievable pressure. But she stood up and she went into the Lord because she was deeply distressed and she prayed bitterly before the Lord. We see that Hannah did one thing that we should take notice of today. She, through all the noise, in spite of all the noise of all this input from her culture, serious pressure, she stood up and she went to God. She went straight to God and said, I'm not listening to this stuff anymore. I'm going to the one that I know is the source, and I'm going to Him, and I'm going to put it before Him. This is the lesson and the only way that we can fight and resist the culture, because you're going to see in a few minutes that this culture traps us and it steals our freedom. Hannah has just found freedom that is undescribable and can only be found in one place, and that's God. There's a quote, and I didn't write it down. Itzhak Denison, I think, is the lady that wrote Out of Africa. She makes a quote in there, and I can't quote it, but basically she's saying that if you don't find your value in God and your purpose, if you don't find your purpose and meaning in life in God, then everybody that tells you something becomes your purpose and your meaning and your value. So whatever you tell me, or you tell me, or you tell me, that's my value. And you see how effective social media is, because everybody's telling you their own opinion. And they're telling you what their value system is. And you're absorbing that. Does that make sense? So we stand up and we go to the one source that where we find value, where we find meaning, where we find our purpose in life. And that is God Himself. And that's what Hannah did. And if you'll look, Lord, we have bitterly vowed before the Lord, forgot, but what you'll give her son. She continued praying before the Lord. Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart only for the Lord, therefore thought she was drunk. Hannah said, no, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I am not drunk. Do not regard your servant as worthless. Then Eli answered, go in peace, grant your petition, God of Israel, grant your petition. And she said, let her servant find favor in your eyes. And here's what Hannah did after she stood up and went to the Lord. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. By going to the Lord, by going to God, she gained peace in her heart. All the other noise kept coming in. She had to go home with with Peninnah. She had to go home with Elkanah. She had to go home with Peninnah's children and all that talking, but she didn't hear it because she only heard the Lord. There's another passage that I want to discuss real quick before I move on that she did. She didn't make a deal with the Lord. If you'll read in her prayer, she vowed a vow, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. At first reading, you're sitting there thinking, okay, Hannah's making a deal with God. But you would be confused. Because what's the culture? The culture that she lived in, why was she having children? She was having children for the benefit of the family. She was having children in that culture so that they would have more children to raise sheep or do whatever it was. But what's she doing? She says, I'm going to give Samuel, or my son, back to the Lord. She's not taking her son for herself. She's saying, God, if you will give me a son, I will give him back to you. She's not making a bargain for her benefit. If you see, she says in there, all the days of his life, no razor shall touch his head. That was the same, you'll see that, if you'll remember. Who else razor didn't touch his head? Huh? Samson. Why? Nazirite vow. His mother was committing him to be a Nazirite, which is in the service of the Lord all his life. She's not making a deal. She is giving listen very carefully, what is her greatest desire? A son. The greatest thing of value besides God to Hannah was her son. And she's saying, I'm going to give him back to you. That's not just a 10% offering. That's all of it. She gave back to God the most important thing besides God in her life. And she says, give him to me and I will give him back to you. And if you read on, God blessed her with a couple of other sons and other daughters. I think she had 6 in total. So what do we learn from Hannah? We learn that we have to go to something that doesn't change. We have to, remember Pastor talking about an unchanging God? God is an unchanging God. Listen, culture changes. When you get my age, when you get 65 years of age, and you look back at the culture that I lived in when I was born versus when I grew up and a teenager and what it is now, culture changes. You have to have it in something that's solid. You have a value. Listen to me, young people, especially young ladies and mothers. You have a value, a purpose. You were created for a purpose and a meaning in life. You have a creator. You are not an accident. Academia got it wrong. You are not a collocation of atoms that happen to have a DNA that manufactured and reproduces itself. A God created you with a purpose, and you have value in that. And we see that Hannah found that God had a plan. She did not know what it was. She had no idea what her plan was, but what God's plan was, but she decided to go to something that wouldn't move, which is God himself, and said, no, I will plant myself there, but no, not only that, I'm going to bring up my son so he understands his value is in God. She is going to teach him. Remember, she weaned him. And if you look at the Jewish history, that normally went 4 to 6 years is the weaning process. So she kept Samuel for 4 to 6 years, and the very value system that she found in God, she established it in Samuel. How do I know that? If you read the book, if you finish reading Samuel, look at the morons that he had to live with. Hophni and Phinehas were insane. They were the most ungodly people. God had to kill them. They were so bad. They were so corrupt. They took advantage of the poor. They took advantage of everybody. And you know what? Samuel stayed true to the Lord and became one of the greatest prophets in the history of Israel. So, again, Hannah taught Samuel that God was his unshakable meaning and purpose. Hannah taught him to put his meaning and purpose in something that did not move, that did not change, and was unchangeable. So let's go to Samuel chapter 2, because it's going to give us a conclusion here, and read what Hannah's prayer is after Samuel was born. And Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exalts in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord." And when you see that, I grew up wondering what in the world, in the Old Testament, you see the horn. The horn is a very important symbol, because you ever seen a rhinoceros? They got a big old horn. And you know what that horn will do? It'll sink a boat. A horn was power, a symbol of power in the Old Testament. And Hannah says, "The Lord is my horn. The Lord is my power." That's just a side note, sorry. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let no arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. You know who that is? Peninnah. Hannah did not have 7 children. She had 6 children, but 7 is the number of perfection. Her son was the perfect gift, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But here's Peninnah. Look at Peninnah. What did she put her value system in? Children. Having children. For her, she went with the culture. She stayed with the culture. I'm going to stay with my culture and put my value system in my culture. But here's what happened. Things changed. And now, not only is she not loved by her husband, but her rival has now got 6 children. And one of them is one of the greatest priests that Israel will ever have. So here we understand the value, what happens, and this is Hannah's prayer, is that we'll find value in something that doesn't shake. So back to Samuel 2. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor, and the Lord makes rich. He brings low, and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces against them. He will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Now, let me cover one other thing I think will help you understand. Sometimes we go through things in life that we don't understand. Often we go through things in life that we don't understand. They're very painful. And in this case, in the story of Hannah, it was a cultural pressure. There's all kinds of pressures we're going to face. Let me bring out something that is just phenomenal when I came to understand it from a commentator. Do you realize that if Hannah had not gone through what Hannah went through, she would never have given Samuel to be a Nazirite priest? She would have had a son, and she would say, I'm happy. Elkanah loves me. My husband loves me. He can go out and help my husband. I have value in my community, and therefore I'm as happy as I can be. And she would have never found her value in God. And one of the greatest priests to ever save Israel, basically, would never have been given to the Lord, and Israel would have been doomed from that. Do you see how God was working through all this? Remember at the first of the story, God closed her womb. He had a purpose. He was doing something that Hannah couldn't see, that nobody could see. And she was getting pounded for it. But she stood up. She stood up and went to her God, went to her Maker, and found her value. Do you see it? You see how beautiful this is? You see why what Bernie, our pastor, is talking about the characteristics of God, the names of God, and all these things? You see why these are important? Because in this life you will have trouble. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're going to face trouble. Yes. But he says, I've overcome the world. I'm allowing this because I have a plan, and I'm going to accomplish my plan, and I'm going to use this in a mighty way that you can't see yet. Will you trust me? Yes. Will you find value in me? Will you put your purpose in me? This is the gift. At the front, at the beginning slide, it said a Mother's Day gift. So the gift is your value. The best gift that anyone can give a mother or anyone else is give them a purpose and meaning in life, and that's where you get your value from. And that all comes because of something very important. You see, Hannah's not the only one to give up her precious son. God gave up his precious son. And he sent him into a very, very ugly, terrible environment to get treated in a despicable way by some of the most vicious Roman soldiers that have ever known how to be cruel to a human being. God gave up his son so that I could have value, so that I could have meaning in life, so that I could have a purpose in life. That is the gift, the Mother's Day gifts that he gives to everyone. And that comes to us. But there is a gift also that we can give away, because we're supposed to take this gift and not hold it, but to pass it on. And that's what Hannah did for the first 4 or 5 years, however many years she instilled in her son. Mothers, you have this beautiful, beautiful gift, and you have the privilege of passing it on to your children to establish a meaning and a purpose in life that no one, no culture, nothing in life can ever take away from them. Right? That's the beauty of motherhood. And if you're not thankful for your mother for teaching you these values, shame on you. Don't just buy her dinner, give her love back and live out this purpose and this meaning in life that you've been blessed with. Thank you, mothers. Thank you for your value. Thank you for giving to the Lord. Amen. Thank you.